Hello, I hope your Saturday is going well. So, what we have here are two books from the 19th century, both with, I'm going to say the same title, almost exactly the same title. This is Men, Women, and Books by Leigh Hunt. It's in two volumes. Both the volumes are bound in this set. You'll notice this title actually has a comma between men, women, and books. So there's commas there. And here is Men, Women, and Books with no commas by Augustine Burrell. This one here by Leigh Hunt is the earlier of the two titles. It was published in the first half of the 19th century, and Augustine Burrell's work was published in the second half of the 19th century. And the Leigh Hunt one is a recent addition to my collection. I actually just purchased it last week, and I was quite happy to find it because it's in quite nice condition. These marbled end papers are really beautiful. But as you can see, a past owner has pasted in, past owner, perhaps the past bookseller, has pasted in a small note explaining about the book. Someone has crossed out the word cloth and replaced it with half, and I'm assuming that says MOR, so perhaps they're referring to half Morocco, because this is a partially leather-bound book here. And so there is that little paste in the front. And then if we turn to the frontispiece here, there is a portrait of Leigh Hunt as a young man. And he's signed his portrait with yours truly, Leigh Hunt. And if we lift up the tissue guard here, here's our title page, and here is the full title of the book. Men, Women, and Books, a selection of sketches, essays, and critical memoirs from his uncollected prose writings by Leigh Hunt in two volumes, and this is the title page for Volume 1, published in New York by Harper & Brothers in 1847. And as you can see, there's a little bit of foxing here, but midway through the book, and let's see if it's going to open up nicely for me here. It did earlier, but yes, here we go. Midway through the book is the title page for Volume 2. It says exactly the same thing, except when it says in two volumes, we have Volume 2. And you can sort of see in the binding that it is indeed two separate text blocks that have, or appear to have been bound together here. And I'm just beginning to read this. I've only read the first two essays here. If you can see in the table of contents for Volume 1, I've read Fiction and Matter of Fact and The Inside of an Omnibus. And I have to say I found this quite entertaining. This is actually one I'd recommend. I've not really read Leigh Hunt before, but I think The Inside of an Omnibus was an especially good introduction to his writing. He muses on about this theoretical dialogue between Dr. Johnson and Boswell about, if Johnson were an omnibus, which sounds quite strange, and by omnibus we're talking about a public vehicle, so sort of a public carriage or a horse-drawn bus. But there's this sort of humorous dialogue, and then it launches into this scene of what you might see if you were riding in an omnibus. And it's sort of the 19th century version of, people you would see on public transportation, and describing these passengers and describing how, if you accidentally climb on board without a book, you're forced to stare at, the shoe of the gentleman beside you, or the notices posted on the sides of the carriage of the omnibus. And that's quite relatable because often I don't read on public transit. I read on long distance public transit, I would say. I will read on a via rail train. In fact, that's how I spend most of my trips. But I will not read on Ottawa's LRT or on the buses here in Ottawa. One, because I like to stay alert, and two, because when it comes to certain types of moving vehicles, buses and cars, I am a little bit susceptible to nausea if I attempt to read, which is unfortunate because I would very much love to have spent my university days reading on buses when I commuted a lot, but I was unable to. But anyway, moving on from that little anecdote there. I'm really enjoying this collection of works by Leigh Hunt, but Augustine Burrell's work has been in my collection, I would say, probably about 2 years longer. I think I purchased it about 2 years ago. Augustine Burrell had been recommended to me by another reader and collector. And I do wonder if Augustine Burrell was influenced by Leigh Hunt's collected work there. So if we open up the Leigh Hunt book, we can see there is a signature in the front from a past owner. Looks like Katie D. Moon was once the owner of this little volume from 1894. And so we have our title page and a dedication here, and then our table of contents. And I have read this one and greatly enjoyed it. I remember liking the essay on Dr. Johnson. I do enjoy pretty much any essay or work on Dr. Johnson just because I do like Boswell's works so much. And one of my favorite essayists, A. Edward Newton, was a collector of Dr. Johnson's works, and so there's the interest there as well. But I also recall especially liking these essays on books, old and new, and on book bindings, and on hours in a library as well. And I do have a 3-volume set of essays titled Hours in a Library. Let's see if we can flip to the back there to one of these that I especially liked. Let's see, books, old and new. And he is talking mainly about English books here, books published in the United Kingdom. But let's try to find the one here on hours in a library. Oh, and the one on the Bonafide Traveler, I enjoyed that essay very much as well. But yes, I'm trying to think of something to say about Hours in a Library, other than the fact that it's a collection of essays, a 3-volume collection of essays by Leslie Stephen, which also makes for incredibly good reading if you're at all interested in essays or, I guess, literary criticism or literary essays. But I just thought it was interesting to add a second book with the same title to my collection. And there is another book by Agnes Repplier that I believe is called Men and Books, which is, once again, also very, very similar. And of course, I don't know it's possible that Leigh Hunt had borrowed the title of Men, Women, and Books from an even earlier work, but I sort of would guess that Leigh Hunt is the essayist who influenced Augustine Burrell and maybe even Agnes Repplier as well in putting together their collections of essays and selecting a title, because I do know that Leigh Hunt was quite a prolific essayist and writer and had a significant influence on many of the essays that followed in the 19th century. But I thought this was interesting, and I thought these were a couple of beautiful, interesting books to show off. And I think I'll leave it at that.